Cool, we're live. So the real thing is that each thing is modularized. He did it in like a big scale, meaning that he built a whole bunch of widgets and other things that he can function and use on other apps. But the idea is pretty much the same. Anything that you're using should be able to stand alone and do anything by itself, regardless of what else you're plugging in. So like, here is my menu bar, or here's what I use to edit a form, or here's what I use to post data. All of these things should be separate from each other. And so let me just, I think it's checkout, checkout, and what did I call this? Stuff? Oh, get checkout. I can do get branch, that you said?
Yeah, it'll list all your fish.
Stuff, aha. So get checkout stuff. Dang. All right, so what I did here, and I think what the best way to show everybody is I'll go over to the galvanized lessons, and then I'll bring it back over to you guys. But the first thing, why does my screen look like? Cool. So what I did was I set up one app, and I put in a whole bunch of different apps inside of it, so modules. And what I did, so if we go over here to, so let's go back to the Learn page, and let's go to the first part of our Angular stuff, building an app. And let's go to, how about ng repeater? Where's my README? README, what is that, Command plus? Better?
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So that, what did that say? Bind list to arrays. There it is. Cool. So the way that I started this off is I feel like a lot of these guys come with the controller as an object, and I learned that like when Peter was doing it, and that was super hard for me to read. And so what I found when listening to John Papa's style guide is he separates controllers, and he also separates his template URLs. The benefit of separating template URLs for people that like haven't figured it out yet, and I think Nick can attest to this, is it's way easier to find syntax errors because it's not all highlighted green. Nick was missing the end of like a header tag the other day, and had that just been in your template HTML, like in your HTML file, you would have been able to see that right off the bat. So I'll open up the ng repeater thing, and I'll go through like my thought process on it, and we can just go through and see why I did what I did. Do you guys need this blown up too? Or? Kablam! All right. So I went through like each lesson, and I made a module for it. So the first thing that we want to look at, I guess, is how we are going to name things. And this is my app. So on the front, let me pull up my index.html page. This is also super ugly, and this will be a little bit different. I can show you guys how it works with routes too, to make like if you want to go from page to page, setting up states, which I have one that I've done that on as well. But so this is my app, and if you'll notice when I have ng app, it just comes over here, and it starts this app. Everything inside of here is a dependency. Dependencies can be anything from a module you created to a third-party module to things that Angular uses specifically. If you guys are doing HTTP stuff right now, you'll notice that you inject HTTP, and you don't need a CDN for that because that's part of Angular. But if you use UI router, that's a dependency injector, and you need a CDN for that because that's a third-party module. So essentially, modules can be broken down to like 3 separate steps, like I just said. One, things that Angular builds for you, right? So there's things that are already built into Angular, and they are massive. The second thing is, the second one are third-party apps like UI router, and the third one are apps or modules you create yourself. So these are all modules that I've created myself. So let's go ahead and look up so let's see here. So let's go ahead and pull over all right. So when I name a module, you should name it whatever its function is. I just call the folder repeater. And the way that I do my controllers is every controller I have starts with a capital letter. It's all Pascal casing. That way I can just look in this folder and see this file. I'm like, cool, I know exactly where my controller is. This helps because, like if all of these guys were in like one big ass file, there's a whole bunch of things going on here, and it's way harder for me to see. So cool. I know I can go to my repeater folder, and I can open up my repeater controller. So let's go ahead and scroll over to repeater. So what I did, the first way that I set this stuff up after I read the lesson is I would go through and I would say, cool, the object controller notation is super confusing for me. So I know that I can separate my controller out by setting my module and then getting my module. So they have a module called app, and they have a component called repeaters. Controller is just called controller, and they have a template URL. So first thing that I need to do is I need to make my actual app called repeater. So I guess that's the best place to start is the module. Repeater module. Okay, any app that I make, so now here's my repeater module. I'm going to call it app.repeater because app is the main app that I'm using, and repeater is the module that I'm building for it. So that way, like, my naming conventions are super easy. I can look at this, I know exactly what it does and where it goes. My component, I just for the sake of me having to remember, I just call it repeater. And the component is what's going to go into your index.html. So here, I've initialized my Angular module called app.repeater. And if you've noticed that I'm setting it here, that means that my dependencies, that array is there, but there's nothing in there. But I can pass dependencies in there if I want. All right, and so now I'm going to go ahead and set it up with a component. And I'm going to call it repeater. And here is where the object notation gets a little bit different than with what we did on the other side. So instead of setting up object notation in one big-ass file and having it lay all the way down, I think everybody who did it for their Reddit clone 1, it's like this massive line of just code and their template URL, and it's just a lot. I set them up into separate files. So let's go ahead and look at the controller file. So I can call it as controller, put it in object notation. I'm going to call the controller function capital R repeater. So I'm going to come over to my repeater file, and, ooh, psych, that's my routes. I'm going to come over to my repeater file, and I'm going to set it up. So if you guys notice, I'm calling, right? I'm getting my app.repeater. So angular.module, I'm getting my app.repeater. I set it over here. I set it right here, and I am getting it right here. So that's why you notice I don't have any dependencies to inject. You still can inject third-party dependencies, but we would do it over here, and we'd call them in here. Anyway, so controller, repeater, this is the name of it. This is calling the function, and here's where I've set the function. If you guys look over here, this controller is just an unnamed controller, right? And I feel like that's kind of weird and unwieldy, especially when you have a fuck ton of controllers to be using at any given point in time. I talked to Brooks, and you can have multiple controllers for one component, but that seems kind of also big and unwieldy. If you're using multiple controllers on one component, it can probably be broken out into another component because of separation of concerns. You want one specific purpose for each thing that you're building. You're modularizing your app. So we come over here and like this is like cool, controller, and it's using this template. So what I do is I copy and paste everything out, and I set up my file, and I set up my files. If someone wants to, I can go over how to set that up later. But I have done this with literally every single one of these. I created each one of these, and you have to link it over into your index.html, and you make sure you put the script tag in there. Like it's a whole big thing. I've gotten really good at debugging because I've seen basically about every error and syntax error known to man through doing all this, from not spelling module correctly to missing commas to everything. But anyway, back over here. So everything else is going to look exactly the same. I've just made it into a separate file so that way I can see it better. You pull this guy over here. You run whatever function you want to run in here, and it works exactly the same. And let's check out the index. So here's what the template URL looks like. And if we look over at this guy, nope. We look over at this guy, nope. If we look over here, here's the path. So we're setting the path for my template URL. And that's it. And so now this is way easier for me to see what the hell is going on. You know, like if I did this, right? I can see that better. Versus if it's just over here in all one thing, I can't really know. I don't really know what's going on. I don't really know what else there's to talk about. Like I said, I can go over naming conventions. We can go through one together, but it's tedious to set up. But it's a pain in the ass to set up initially. But if you do it right, it lends itself to being way easier down the road. So if you suffer for it in the beginning, it's better off later on. What's up?
So when you're serving it to a client, do all of those need to be, all the HTML files need to be inside the client or in subdirectories?
So
that's what we're doing with the ActJS, where we're doing the express static path join directory name, right?
Yeah, 1 second. So what the fuck did I call that? Oh, snaps.
Because yesterday I was having a problem, and you've probably seen this error like you mentioned, it just couldn't find one of the JS files.
So that problem might be twofold. The first one is if you're going off of what Brooks did with his Express Angular clone.
Yeah.
There's a whole line in there that immediately sets the path to the beginning and will only pull your index file the whole time.
From the client.
Correct.
Yeah, I think that's where I'm having some problems, because like when you try and break it up into templates, like so you have a footer, right? That's a different HTML file, and you have a nav bar, that's a different one. Well, that's what I've done, but then like you have a main, and each one has its own controllers in it, but it wasn't able to find one of like the info files,
Sure.
JS files, which were a big component.
So that's a fully loaded question, and I'll tell you what like I figured out and what I know about it from what I've gathered. Your index HTML page, your base index page, should only have something on it that is going to stay consistent all the way through. So the only thing that goes in here, so maybe you set up your, like Gmail has, maybe you set up your header and your sidebar just like this. It wouldn't be very dynamic, but that layout would be there the whole time. Everything that goes in your, like really all I have here in this guy is my scripts and the UI view that's necessary for changing my routes and for changing where I'm going, for changing states. I think that Peaches and I were going over yesterday the issues with what was happening is we were just getting past the index file because of how Brooks had it set up, and it sounds like it has it set up just like a static page server. I mean, I don't know. That's the way like everything else, like this should be pretty much bare bones. Basically, there should be like nothing on here unless you're 100% sure you want that on there for every single page.
But you could also do an ng show or hide later.
It would be so. All of that should be done through your template URL, and you can use the same template URL path.
That's what it is.
Yeah, the same template URL path. But when you're doing states like this, you don't even need the component name anymore over here. The component name is now just the path you're sending it to. It's this guy right here. So, like for example, this is just like a basic forms thing that I set up. Here's my app.js. So I have UI router and I have app forms. This is the config that everybody went through when they were doing UI router. And here's the config page. So I have my home, and it's going to render forms, and then I've also got a link to go to my test page. So if we pull up my forms page, oops, that's my forms controller, which does absolutely nothing. My forms template, there's the test page. But yeah, like as you get through like states, your index page gets less and less and less on it because you can just do anything you want with your template URL.
You'll have to come over.
Sure. Does anyone like have any like specific questions about like naming conventions or setting this up? I mean, like I know that's like a lot to see. It's easy for me to sit up here and say this, but I feel like everybody's been going through and doing it like the component controller object way. And I would just like, and I think they tell you in Angular too, like, oh hey, you can do this or in a Reddit clone too. Oh hey, by the way, you can set it up this way. And I just find it super easy to do. Does anyone have like anything specifically they want to see or any question that like I can maybe help with? other than just naming conventions.
I mean, have you gotten into like embedding, certain modules or controllers into others, and like allowing them to access the same information?
No, embedding like nesting controllers.
Yeah.
No, I haven't gotten there yet, but he talked about it and went over it, and that's like one of the really powerful points of Angular, and one of the things that I guess it translates into React and other things is you don't have to necessarily two-way data bind when you nest controllers, because you can make it basically pass it a function and say, hey, when this happens, do this, and the data is not necessarily bound together, but you can still change it with the parent. Apparently, that's like a really strong, solid concept to learn. Guillermo was telling us about that when we were at the React.js meetup, and I think that's part of the Angular or the Reddit 3 clone.
You mean like nested views?
Yes, and also like, having a service that they are accessing the same. I guess I have like an NGRP within an NGRP that is a nested view. It gets complicated.
Okay.
I'll show you later.
Check it out. There could be scoping issues if you're having trouble accessing variables.
I think it might be.
So ng repeat creates a new scope and brings in the values from top. If you create a variable inside of it without using control dot, it's a new variable only in that scope. And it will be available higher or somewhere else, which can be confusing sometimes.
Yeah.
But if you put it on the control, then it's now the same across all instances of that versus scope. So I'll just leave it to that.
Yeah, I'll just give you guys just a few more things I spent like 3 days listening to that dude talk. Some of the benefits that I had. So this is his Avengers app, and I'll go over this real quick. Talk about like factories and services, so that way you guys can see that. But the biggest thing that like I've had problems wrapping my mind around for doing the Reddit clone too is understanding what's happening where. When we were doing anything with Express, everything was being rendered in the server. Everything was being rendered in the server. And so when you're setting up the Reddit clone too, you're thinking to yourself like, well, this path doesn't make any sense, or like this route doesn't make any sense because it needs to get the data. And you end up with this one big ass controller with all these separate functions. And in reality, what we want to do is that the reason why Angular is so powerful, right, is because all it does is just process data as it comes through. And you set up separate controllers to do so. Our model is basically our database. So here would be an example. This guy has, so here's his, let's see, where is his main app? Index.html, app.module, his widget. One second. Blocks, core. I just want to show you guys the way he has his base app laid out. And you'll see how all these other things work together. So like, so this guy has, he's like, John Papa sets up a data service, which is what has everything that he wants to do as far as like pinging his API. It's got HTTP in there. It's got all these other things that I don't know about, Logger and other things like that. But he sets it up into its own app module, and he puts in this thing called core, and then he requires it over into his main app. And the power with this is that now you have like a separate file with like maybe your API calls as a data service as a factory, and it stands alone. And you can just make those get, post, delete, and put requests generic and plug them in through your controller, like bring them in when the state changes. That way they're not really necessarily bound to that specific data, but they become bound to that data as it changes. It's really cool and it's really powerful, and I wish that I could just find where the fuck his main app is. App.module. Okay, cool. So check this out. So like he has his app, just his app, right? And he has the core, and inside of his core is, you guys can see, can you guys, yeah, okay. His core is his config.js, which is the path we set up. So here's his config.js, which this is all of his, I don't know, what is this stuff? I don't know, stuff that I don't understand. And then These are all the modules he's requiring in over there. And here's a whole bunch of other stuff he has going on. So in his core and his data service is there too. So his core is like what makes his app run, right? These are things that are like, or maybe you're going out and doing with third party. Maybe you're making API calls. And he has testing, I think, in there too, right? And so then if we come back over to, why do those keep disappearing on me? So app widgets, these widgets are down here. And these are all things that like he has separately. So like he's made a sidebar, right? Jules, he made a clock. He made all these other things, and this works to his advantage because if you have an awesome sidebar, right, you can use it any other time you want. So let's see what his clock looks like. Is this a clock widget? Close, sidebar. So cool. Yo.
If you want those to stick around, double click the file.
Oh.
When you open it.
I literally never knew that.
It'll stay up top there.
Thank you. And so he has, like, these are all standalone things. So you can see how the core is actually doing something. It's calling, what's up?
Can you open your sidebar a little more just so we can see the names?
Sure. This fucking thing.
Thanks.
I can't figure out how to, I can no longer scroll in this because somehow this came up on my screen and it's a pain in my ass.
Dude, that came up on mine too.
Awesome.
I think it was an update or something.
Great. It's horrible. So you can see how like his core does like all these services requests, right? Like he has a whole bunch of things in there I don't understand. He's got logger in there. He has his data service which calls API, and then app.module. So he has his Avengers, right? So this is really cool to see. So in his Avengers JS, he's using his data service module that he made and logger, which I mean, Chad, you know what logger is, or does anyone know what logger is? I'm unsure what it is or what it does.
Where is that?
Right here.
It could be a third-party thing they brought in. Sometimes people, so down there, like line 22, he's doing logger.info.
Right.
They might have like stubbed out the console log for some reason. Or
Right.
Maybe that saves it somewhere custom.
Okay. So he's bringing in his data service, right? And look how small his Avengers controller is. Like he's not really doing all he's doing is bringing in a function that he's already done over in his data service over here. Bam, data service over here. So get Avengers. All of these things over here, right, he does in his data service. And look how small his controller is. And he can manipulate those things based on what he wants, based on like the function he wants to call. And then you come back over to data service, Avengers. He's got his dashboard, which I think is just like his main layout. Yep, so that's just his layout for how things are going to appear. So each thing, you can see how he modularizes everything. It just gets different, and then he's got a layout page too. What's up?
So he doesn't have to bring in those services or factories into the app.module because they were already brought into the individual modules.
Because he modularizes them. So if you look, so let's go to app.core. Okay, and so if you see this over here, core module. Cool. So this is app.core, right? Here's app.core, and this is when he's setting it, and he's setting it with all these dependencies. Right? And so like you can see like the power of now modularizing things. Like now look how small his app is, but look how each thing does separate things. And if we get into it, right, and we get into, these are all ng-animate, ng-route. These guys are all Angular stuff. Blocks are probably a third-party module. You really get into it, each one. So he uses Moment. There you go. And his config for it, so his routes and everything like that. Each thing stands alone. It can operate, on its own piece. It doesn't know. And the benefit of that, like the real benefit of that, if you take nothing else away from this, is like it speeds everything up. So imagine being able to work on something and like everybody be able to work on different things, and you'd be able to piece them together at the end. You don't have to wait on everybody else or everything else. Now imagine if you looked at your Reddit and all of the controllers that now rely on this one thing or on this other thing, or can they be separated? And can someone be patching this while I'm working on this? I don't know. Hopefully it seems like everyone kind of is cool with that. I mean, hopefully I answered some questions, but the big thing is if you go here, be able to see, cool, I know now that I can make this into its own file. I can make my own Angular module. I can make my own file controller, and I can make my own file template URL, and see how that all kind of comes together and the benefit of it. I know that's a lot, and I feel like I just talk a lot, so.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, cool. Right on, guys.